Hello and very welcome to this week's edition of AFI Weekly here on the Under Centre podcast. Dara here with you as always. Delighted to have both Malloy brothers back with me this week to chat. Alex unfortunately is not available, so we brought in the OG crew, you can almost say at this stage, minus Al.
Yeah, I wanted to wait until like the last round of games for the season, so I didn't have to give any like spicy takes and get absolutely called out for it online. So I think I did myself a bit of a favor by waiting so long to get back into it.
Well, there's still a few spicy takes you can give because the season's not totally over yet. So we'll see. We'll see. Rain, we are back after a couple of weeks now yourself away. Hopefully you are back revived and energized and ready to look ahead now soon to the playoffs for both Hart Bowl and Shamrock Bowl. And of course, let's not forget the Shield and the Plate as well. So there's still plenty of post-season football to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. I like this time of the year in the AFI. You kind of start to see that table kind of solidify, you know, where people are, and it makes the games a little bit easier to talk about. So yeah, look, it's a great time of the year, and looking forward to getting into the business end of the season.
Yeah, and speaking of tables, the best place to see the table is ucp.ie. That's where you'll see the latest AFI tables ahead of the final game week of fixtures in the regular season, which takes place this weekend. You can see who's in and who's out at the moment. The guys over at Rain Rocks did a great job designing the website and putting it together. They are the sponsor of this show and every show this AFI season. I forgot to say it last week, so I made sure I say it at the start so I don't forget. We have plenty of games to look back on as well. Some huge talking points, some really important results when it comes to seeding for playoffs, when it comes to relegation as well. And I think that's where we're going to start, considering we have a former Panther here as well now, so we're going to have to bring him in on this. UCD 35, the South Dublin Panthers 0. The game was ended one play into the second half after, unfortunately, an injury to Connor Hoskins. He was unable to continue to play. UCD were 20-0 up at the time. Passing touchdowns from Aaron Mooney to Sidney Pindy for his first for UCD and to Joe Carroll. Jack Finnegan contributed with a rushing touchdown, and Alex Kusmrik also contributed with a 2-point conversion as well. The Panthers were low on numbers going into the game. Injuries continued to hamper them throughout. They lost 3 players. They decided to play the second half with the 11 that were still available. Unfortunately, like I mentioned, that first play of the second half, Connor was unable to continue, which meant due to AFI rules, the game had to be cancelled. It goes down as a 35-0 win because UCD get 15 points added on to their current score. The Panthers, by rule in the bylaws, they actually forfeit that game, which means that they lose a point. So going from having their 1-point advantage over the Cowboys, they now are level on points. And because they have a forfeit to their name, they also now are below the Cowboys when it comes to the table too, heading into the final game week of the season. You know, we thought, guys, that this relegation battle between the Panthers, the Cowboys, and UL was finished after the teams played each other, and it was the Panthers and UL that got the all-important draw, you could say, between each other that would have saved them. But then what has happened this past weekend as well, you know, has really put a spanner in the works. And, you know, it's not the way we want to see the relegation battle finish. You know, this going through technicalities and league bylaws and stuff to have a team finish last is not exactly what we want. But, you know, Fionn, I'll start with you on this one. There was always a chance with this when, you know, we had heard the rumors from early on at the start of the year that there was a player shortage with lads deciding to pursue other avenues, as Ryan has decided he's had enough and wants to leave. But, you know, Fionn, you know, yourself, you've decided obviously not to play anymore, and you're now an outsider looking in. But sort of your view on how the Panthers now season looks like it's going to finish.
Yeah, obviously made the decision well in advance of the season to retire, so I'm not really involved in the kind of the player discussion we're maybe bringing up here. But I think they'll be very disappointed that it comes on the back of off the field issues, because I think they can be and should be very proud of being able to field the teams. I believe like 3 or 4 weeks ago when I was last on the show, Dara, we were chatting about how numbers are going to be an issue. The Panthers have kind of historically had low enough numbers, but have fared pretty well with those and been able to source talents. And we discussed about the potential long-term benefits of getting young players involved and being able to bring them up. And the scores are going to suffer, but at least you're bringing up the next batch of talent. So I think as a club, they'll be bitterly disappointed that essentially, right, this is an off the field issue. It's nothing to do with the temperament of the guys that were at the game. Just a matter of league bylaws. Ultimately, the injuries happen in this sport, and for it to be on a technicality that they're no longer permitted, and correctly, right? That's for player safety, but that they're not able to finish that game. And I think there'll be a certain amount of ire as well in the clubhouse, given the Panthers' recent histories with bylaws and things over the last 3 or 4 years. I think they'll be a little bit disappointed. It's clear, as you said, look, the bylaws are there. There's nothing shady about it, but I do think they'll be a little bit disappointed that it's off the field things that have put them on. They got a hugely important win, as you said, set them up, seemed to be pretty clear cut then that they were going to survive the relegation battle. And then for it to now be dragged in, and as you said, they're pretty much nailed on now by way of the kind of stacking bylaws. That means they can't overcome any issue unless they beat the upcoming game against the Trojans this weekend and the Cowboys lose. That's maybe the only way they could do that. So, look, I'm sure the guys are disappointed. I do want to say, obviously, anytime you have these scenarios for any team, fair play to the lads that do stick around. Myself and yourself and Rian, we're on teams and situations like that back with the Pirates. We know how difficult it is, but you really appreciate it. I think we discussed off air as well. It's difficult. Rumors about players trying to leave mid-season, and ultimately it's a hobby, right? I'm all for letting the guys go and find a situation that works for them, whether that's geographically or playtime or level or training or teammates or whatever the reason is. I think they're all valid reasons to go and find a team. I think it's not disappointing, but it's difficult. It's a difficult decision to make. It shouldn't be made lightly, because ultimately, as you said, you're leaving players behind. And we saw on the Pirates as well, there's a critical mass, right? There's ultimately a minimum number of players above 11. It's probably around 15, 16, that if you can't have that unit together, it's not going to be viable to put a football team on the pitch. And so I think that's the most difficult thing to take. I think it's a culmination of things that led to this. I don't think there's anything that anybody could or should be pointing a finger at to say that's the reason. I do think certainly there was plenty of stuff that was completely outside of the club's control that have led to this. I'm sure the club itself will stick around. That's not based on any insight, but I'm more than confident they can do that. They've got a good board in place. It was a new board for this year, so they're growing into it. And I think, look, anything can happen. We'll see what the final weekend brings. But if they are relegated, I'm sure they can rally, build themselves up. There's a lot of good talent. As I said the last time I was on, I was excited by what I saw in the preseason for the young players that they managed to bring in, and a lot of low experience players, let's say, because they're not always young in this sport. But yeah, I think they'll have to lick their wounds a little bit. And as I said, ultimately, maybe a little bit disappointed that off the field, and by off the field, I mean not the guys that were between the hash marks, the 11 guys on the pitch, led to this situation. As we said, huge battle to not forfeit games in advance. That's something they can be very proud of. And so for it to ultimately end up in injuries, taking that effort away, because that's a week in, week out effort, I think ultimately a lot of disappointed lads.
Yeah, and I'll echo what you said there. The fact that the 14, 15 lads that went out on Sunday are probably the 14, 15 lads that have been there every game week and have been, making sure that they get through this season and try and help the club. So obviously commend them, and they're not the lads that are the reason why the club is struggling at the moment, and where they are, where they are. So yeah, my hat's off to them. Hopefully they get a little positivity to finish the season. We'll look into that game with the Trojans towards the end. On UCD side of things, there, second place is wrapped up. They are going to be having a home semi-final. At the moment, looks like it's going to be the Admirals. Actually, I think it's set in stone now that it's going to be the Admirals. Nobody else can catch them. So, the UCD had a good win over Cork in Cork earlier on this year. Although the emergence now of the Kennedy brothers as a dual attacking threat, as we'll get into their game in a little bit, is definitely going to cause them a few troubles in that semi-final. But anything to add on UCD side of things before we move on?
No, look, I think slightly less dominant than we thought they were going to be pre-season, but I think they had their little wobble. They lost, obviously, the game to the Trojans, and then the Rebels game was quite close, but they pulled out a win there. So I think they'll be happy. The first half, they were in control, it seems like, by the scoreline. Probably a bit disappointed they couldn't keep sharpening themselves with a second half, but ultimately they'll be happy to wrap it up. I think they'll be looking forward to the Cowboys now. I think they'll want to make sure they put their mark. There'll be nothing easy, and regardless of whether or not the playoffs are locked in, I think they'll want to make sure that they're coming in nice and hot to these playoffs.
Mm-hmm. Rian, I know, so you've been sort of popping in and out there. Unfortunately, your internet connection is deciding that it doesn't want to cooperate this evening. But anything from your point of view on the UCD and Panthers before we move on?
Yeah, no, look, I genuinely heard nothing of what Fionn said, so I'm not really sure what he's already talked about. Yeah, disappointing to see a team finishing out a game with a lack of players. It's something that the sport has struggled with for a long time, and seems to be continuing to struggle. We alleviate that problem sometime in the future. And yeah, look, UCD looked good. They looked like they were the bowl contenders that they are. So yeah, I think that's pretty much sums it up.
Okay, perfect. Let's move on to the other games. We'll jump back actually to Saturday's game, and that was the first of our 60 burgers that we were treated to this past weekend. The Belfast Trojans 60, the UL Vikings 0. Scoring wise, so hold on, I have to get my phone for this one because there was a lot of them. So I just want to make sure I credit every single person that got it in place. So, and thanks to the Trojans for sending on the stuff. It's really, really good. So it started off with a Jamie Bard Force fumble recovery on the Vikings opening drive. It then turned into an 8-0 lead with Rayshawn Boswell scoring a rushing touchdown. Mo Ramadan went in for the 2-point conversion. It went to 16-0 after Adam Mackley went in for a rushing touchdown of his own, and he scored the 2-point conversion. 16 turned into 24 after Dom Lynn connected with Max Dimitrov on a receiving touchdown. Dom then connected to Noish Ben Haim for a 2-point conversion. 32-0 it happened because through a Dom Lynn to Rayshawn Boswell 75-yard receiving touchdown. Mo went in for 2, followed by a Brandon Falconer interception. Joel McKibben went in for a rushing touchdown of his own. The 2-point was no good in that sense, and that was just halftime. So in the second half, Dom Lynn came out and Michael Ferris went in for quarterback, and some other rotations as well along the team. It was then 44-0 after Max Dimitrov's kickoff return for a TD right at the start of the third quarter. The 2-point conversion was no good. 44 went to 50 after Michael Ferris hit Mo Ramadan with a receiving touchdown. Then to finish off the scoring, Kevin Sungo with 2 rushing touchdowns in the fourth quarter, sprinkled in with another Michael Ferris to Mo Ramadan connection for a 2-point conversion. that was all the scoring from that game. A huge win for the Trojans, who again cement their number 1 seed. It's official; they will be the number 1 seed. They will be facing the 4th place team, which we are not sure yet who it's going to be. We'll get into in a few minutes. But the Trojans are continuing. Ryan, I'll start with you first on this one. Continuing their fantastic season, and it's full steam ahead now for the playoffs.
I mean, they're really putting down a marker and setting a tone for the rest.
He's on a delay.
He's gone.
Yeah, look, I think
Fionn,
it's obvious where he was going with that. Yeah, they've set down a real marker. I think it's been interesting. It's been cool to see a second team come up and challenge it. I think it was something we were nervous of, and we wanted to see who would take up the mantle, whether the Rebels would continue to take it on or another team. I think probably it's fair to say most people preseason, based off the last couple of seasons, thought it would be the Trojans or the Panthers. I think it pretty quickly became clear it wasn't going to be the Panthers, but the Trojans have really stepped on the gas and kept going. I've liked how they've mixed it up. I think Dom has played very well this season. I don't remember, was he injured most of last season? I don't remember, or if he did, he certainly had a rockier season last season.
He played last season.
For the Trojans in general. So I think they'll be delighted. Relying on that run game, I think something the Trojans have always been very effective on. And so it's really important then when they can sprinkle in the pass. So I don't think the Trojans have any concerns. I think they've got plenty of firepower on both sides of the ball to be able to deal with most. And again, I think it's another sign that numbers come good, right? A huge amount of numbers, whether that's in training or at the games, is really an advantage and helps you play competitive football for 8 games. It's a short enough season we have, but it really helps to be able to put those numbers together and use them in training and in the games. So I think the Trojans are looking very, very strong. I am very excited. I think it's a pretty competitive playoff picture we've got ourselves, and I don't think any team is necessarily nailed on, but I think the Trojans are very deserving of their number 1 seed this season.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially if you go down to Dublin and beat UCD on their home field, you definitely deserve that number 1 seed. And I'm sure that any team that finishes 4th is not looking forward to the idea of heading to Belfast to take on the Trojans. But hey, look, listen, you never know what can happen on a day when it comes to that, for sure. On UL side of things, again, we've come to this part of the season where, numbers are tough too. Unfortunately, they weren't able to, hit the same heights they did when they were able to beat the Cowboys a few weeks ago. At this point of the season, it's about getting it done with, try and get some sort of momentum maybe in the Shield playoffs if it is the case that you're able to play them, and then just head into the offseason and rebuild.
Yeah, look, I think UL would have come in fairly pragmatic, I'd imagine. I think of all the university teams, they tend to get quite a lot of fluctuation in their squad. Finn O'Donovan moving on this season was big for them. He's been hugely dynamic for them in the past couple of seasons. So that'll be something that anytime you get a big piece of offense move on like that, I think it's difficult for the coordinators and the team in general to shift. But look, I think they'll have marked staying up in the Prem as a big objective for this season. They've achieved that. I think they're probably nailed on, or if not nailed on, they're certainly favourites to get a run out in the Shield. I think that'll be exciting for them. And I think they can play competitive football if they can manage to get the numbers. I think the longer on into the summer, as you mentioned, gets harder and harder for them as players move on and J1s and things. It's a pretty full-on academic roster they have. Do you know what I mean? There's not that too many alumni, at least from my understanding of the roster that they have. So they'll have to manage that a little bit. But I think they'll be fairly pleased with the work they put in. Not a lot of wins, obviously, but they got the job done and they won the games they had to win to make sure they stay up.
Yeah, absolutely. We will move on then to the last game in the Premier Division, and this was the big one probably of the whole weekend. It was the Admirals welcoming the Knights to Cork. The Admirals come out on top in a crucial game for them, and they had already before the game secured their playoff spot, but now they have secured third spot, so they'll, like I mentioned, be going to Dublin instead of Belfast, and travel that helps. Huge win for them, a huge win also for the Dublin Rebels in this one, because now the Knights, their fate is out of their hands when it comes to playoffs. They are in fourth at the moment, ahead of the Rebels, 2 points ahead of them, but the Rebels play this weekend against UL, and look, most people would expect the Rebels to do the business there. So they will go level on points. And crucially, the Rebels have a head-to-head over the Knights, which means that the Rebels would take that fourth and final playoff spot. Heartbreaking for the Knights. They started the season so well. They beat teams quite well. But when it came to the end of the season and those crucial games against Cork this past weekend, and also against the Rebels there a couple of weeks ago too, they just weren't able to get the job done. Kind of shows a little bit, and no disrespect to anyone on the Knights or the Knights roster, but kind of shows maybe just the little bit of maturity that they're missing. There's a lot of young guys in a lot of key areas of that team, especially at quarterback. The future is only bright for the team, especially with these guys, if they can continue the trajectory that they're on in terms of the progression that they've made. They obviously if it happens, we still don't know what's going to happen this weekend, but if it happens that they do in fact have to settle for the Shield rather than the actual Shamrock Bowl playoffs, it shouldn't be looked at as a disappointment. It's progress. It's a much better progress than last year. And I think that if the guys go off the off-season, recruit a bit better, the success they've had with the youth team, and things can definitely improve again next season.
Yeah, massively. And I think that's important to note as well. I think last season, it's a step up from last season because they outperformed, I think, what a lot of the expectations were for them last season. They'll be bitterly disappointed, as you said. 2 key games, the Rebels and the Admirals, would have been the ones that are circled on the calendar that kind of beat the teams around you. Didn't quite shake out for them this year. But look, they were competitive games. I don't think 30-10 is particularly bad. That Cork team is playing really, really well. The Kennedy brothers are an absolutely dynamic weapon they have there on offense. So, and the Knights kept it competitive. I was following along the scores of that one. So up till halftime, it was reasonably close, if I remember correctly. So I think they'll be proud. Look, they'll be disappointed to have been the ones that got shuffled out. But ultimately, I think it's great. I'm going to keep saying it. It's great for the AFI to have real legit storylines to talk about, that teams are on the edge of bubbles, and it is coming right down to the last game of the season in order to figure out where the final standings are going to be, who's going to make it into the playoffs, who's going to settle for the Shield. I think that's massively important when you have an 8-team league. You got to keep the interest. I think as we grow the audience and the interest in the league, storylines are going to be pivotal. Do you know what I mean? It's a sport for us, but it's a product for the spectators. So we need to make sure we're doing what we can. I think I know we're probably going to talk about it in a minute, but I saw a lot of the social media as well. Super credit to the Cork Admirals for hosting I believe it was their family day this weekend, wasn't it? So I think they did a terrific job there. Looked like the atmosphere was fantastic. They do that every season, and I think it's great. I think them and the Trojans at the moment have a really great game day atmosphere. I'm sure one of the teams is going to be rolling their eyes saying, how does he not remember us? But certainly those two stand out for me about how they go about their game day and what they bring. And I think, look, it's probably far-sighted. We're probably not close to drawing in hundreds or even thousands of spectators to games, but it's important we put plans in place and start to map out the logistics of these things. And the Trojans kind of have a weekly one. The Rebels have, or not the Rebels, the Admirals have a single one a season, but they really get a lot of energy and momentum into that weekend. So I think that's really cool. So yeah, ultimately for the Knights, I think they will be disappointed. I think they should be disappointed, but I think it's very good. It's a good sign to be disappointed that, look, they were 2 competitive games. This season, it didn't break your way. Another game under the belt, as you said, for a lot of young key components of that offense and defense, and they'll they should be on a platform to keep building going forward into the next season.
Yeah, absolutely. On the Admiral side of things, just the scoring wise, I should mention as well. On the Knights, it was a Zach McDowell passing touchdown to Marty Caskey that even Shane also hit a field goal. For the Cork Admirals, it was the Ben Kennedy show. Ben Kennedy rushing touchdown. Ben Kennedy rushing touchdown. Ben Kennedy rushing touchdown. Ben Kennedy rushing touchdown. 4
big old long
rushing
boys as
touchdowns.
well, weren't they? Like 89 yards, 70 something yards.
25, 80, 30, and 15. Yeah. So Jake also contributed with 1 rushing 2-point. Ben also had a rushing 2-point on top of that. And then Jan Decini connected to Aaron Hogan for a 2-point conversion too. Sacks on the day were credited to Colin Wolfe, Timothy Payton, Matthew Sibioni, and Ao Mumuni. I'm terrible at pronouncing names. I'm really sorry about that. Also throw in a pick by Liam O'Leary as well. Ben's stats this year as well have been incredible. He's only been around, unfortunately, for 3 games. And that was against the Rebels, the Cowboys, and the Knights just past weekend. He has 11 touchdowns in those 3 games.
Yeah, huge, and huge to do it against, as we just spoke about, the Knights and the Rebels, right? Those bubble teams, that's where you want it. Cowboys, fantastic. No disrespect to the Cowboys, though. I still think they're probably a half tier below where the Admirals are in this phase of competition. But yeah, to have that man come in for those 3 games and deliver as he has, and hopefully, obviously, tends to be a lot more less structured than in the NFL. We hope and we assume he's going to be around for the playoffs, because the Admirals are locked in for the playoffs, right? So that's going to be huge for them now to get him back up and running, and, or should I say, continue the vein of form that he's in, and make sure they don't deviate too much from the game plan that's been working for them so well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, like we mentioned, the Cork are in 3rd on 10 points. They wrap that up. The Knights in 4th at the moment on 8 points, but they do not have their own fate in their hands. We'll get into why that is in the previews towards the end of the show. Yeah, moving on to Division 1's games. We'll start with the second of the 2 60 burgers we were treated to at the weekend. It was the Loud Mavericks wrapping up their regular season with a 60-0 win over the Antrim Stags. 5 passing touchdowns from Ty Henry, 2 to Finn O'Donovan, 1 to Brendan Sims, 1 to Brandon Poland, 1 to Nathan Hardy. Andrea Rinaldi had 2 rushing touchdowns, and John O'Carroll had a rushing touchdown of his own. So for the Mavericks, they are absolutely sailing into the playoffs. They finish the regular season with a points differential of plus 358.
Yep. Sign of a well-rounded team. I think we all suspected the arrival of Ty Henry was going to do wonderful things. We suspected he would probably not be able to stay off the field, even though the rumors were he was only going to coach at the start, I believe. But I don't think that was ever really going to be the case. And he seems to be enjoying his football. Obviously, we haven't got Alex with us today, but I think that went pretty much, with all due respect to the Stags, I think that went pretty much the way everyone expected it to. Huge momentum now, well-deserved first seed for the Mavericks, and I think we're going to see a dominant. I think it represents one of the dominant seasons we've seen by any team in the last few years, especially in Division 1. So, look, the Mavericks haven't had it all their own way in the playoffs in recent years, so there'll be a little bit of nerves, but I think ultimately, I guess, to contradict myself, a huge amount of confidence now with the new setup they have. They've been hugely well-rounded, I think, is what I've been impressed with. You don't get to a number 358 without scoring a lot of points, but also without conceding a lot of points. So obviously no losses, 8 wins. You can't really script it that much better, could you, Dara?
No, you couldn't at all. And I think it was their third. I think Alex was saying it was their 3rd shutout in a row as well, I mean, on defense. So it's not just the offense humming at the moment; it's the defense as well.
Yep. And look, on the Stags' point of view, I think we're looking a little bit like UL maybe in that same vein. They'll have targeted stay off the bottom, prove yourself this season. It's obviously a combined team, so there's a lot of stuff that needed sorting out there. This is their first season, right? They weren't up last season.
And speaking to a few of the Stags when they came down to Dublin and about what they were looking to do, it was more of a case of making sure that they play every game, because obviously with the Razorbacks and the Jets and their last year that they didn't play games due to player numbers. So the fact that they were able to play a full 8 games, now there was the one game where they had to kneel out the second half due to a similar issue with the Panthers, where they were running the risk of not having 11 players, so they just wanted for player safety and for them to also be able to get their win, their solitary win this year against the Vipers, kind of helps puts that cherry on the cake of what would be, some people would have had their doubts, but what would have been a quite successful first season for a merger.
Yep. And was that not ruled a forfeit though, Dara, for the Stags when they kneeled out? No,
because the refs didn't stop it. Both teams agreed just to kneel out the second half.
I suspect now we're going to see a very large complaint lodged from the Panthers. So I think this is going to be something we're going to have to keep our eye on now. I think that's a very fine subtlety between the rules on whether or not you had the bodies to finish out a game or not. So I'll be interested to see now how this shakes out. But yeah, just to finish up on the Stags, fair play to them. Not just a win, also a tie. Wasn't the most spectacular game of football we ever commented on. But look, to get 3 points, not just 2, is something the lads can be hugely proud of. And as they said, the main goal was to participate in all 8 games. That's been a huge achievement, especially for an amalgamated squad like that. I think they need to add a little something to the jerseys maybe in the off season. I think they absolutely play in black while cool. It lacks a little bit of flair, but hopefully they'll get on that pretty soon.
What I'm led to believe was that first of all they were delayed in getting their actual home jerseys, and with AFI rules, if it's your first season as a club, you only have to have 1 set of jerseys, which is fine. They were delayed getting them. I think they did arrive at one point. They might. I'm open to be told that I'm wrong, but I think they did arrive. But I think they opted just to continue with those jerseys for the rest of the year and start fresh next season with that jersey.
Okay, well, I'm glad my critique is valid then, because they are rubbish jerseys basically from the bottom of the bin bag or wherever they were. But
well, look, that day they went to play the Crusaders and both teams were in black. It was just an eyesore for the ages. That was rough, and it was even rough for the likes of like myself trying to scout the tape of that game for looking ahead to Panthers and Kildare games. It's tough trying to see that. So I think that's pretty much it on that game. The last game of the weekend was a sort of curtain raiser to the semi-final. Both these teams knew that they would be facing each other. We just had to figure out where the game was going to happen. It was the West Dublin Rhinos 8, the Westmeath Minotaurs 35. With that win, the Minotaurs secure second spot, meaning the Rhinos will have to go to Mullingar on the 5th of July for the Sharp Bowl semi-final. On the Rhino side of things, quarterback Kevin Kelly connected with David Rubin for a passing touchdown in the fourth quarter. Owen O'Donoghue rushed a 2-point conversion for the Rhinos on that. On the Minotaur side of things, Rafa Montero contributed with 2 rushing touchdowns. Joe Kinahan on his return to action as well contributed with a rushing touchdown. Connor Brennan had 2 passing touchdowns on the day. 1 to Cottle Dunn and 1 to Damas Viles. Damas also had a touchdown called back, Fionn, for a unsportsmanlike because he celebrated into the end zone and the referees pulled the touchdown back.
Well, it's not the NFL No Fun League, but it might as well be. I can't think of anything clever to do off AFI.
Anti-fun league.
Anti-fun league. Anti-fun initiatives. That's disappointing, but ultimately, look, we've all been whinging about this rule for a long time. You can't really argue we didn't know. So ultimately, you got to save the celebrating to the touchline, regardless of whether we think that's reasonable or not for a sport that contains grown men. But yeah, I'm not going to get into the politics of it. But hey, look, I tried to, like I said, I was saying to you off air, I managed to stay off the show for most of the league. I didn't have to get into any controversy or anything. I'm going to be a little bit controversial here. you got to blame the player for that one, right? Just keep your hand down. I don't know what he did, waved, high stepped, whatever it is.
He jumped
Hand the
in.
ball to-
Like he literally,
jumped
he
in.
kind of like jumped in to the
Can't
end
do
zone.
it. Marshawn Lynch, crotch grab. This is what I'm imagining in my head. Just can't do it. Can't do it. Is it fair? No. Do we all know that's the case? Unfortunately, we do. So I'm gonna have to put this one on the player's shoulders, I'm afraid. Although very nitpicky ref. It definitely was probably a Rhino's side joke. Oh no, sorry, you guys were playing in the game. It was definitely one of them real nitpicky. It was probably chippy ref, was it?
No, it
last
wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't. I should also mention Jay Bruton had 5 extra points on that as well for the Minotaurs. Yeah, so like I said, it was kind of a curtain raiser to the semi-final. The two teams are going to do it all over again on the 5th of July in Mullingar to see who will be heading to Athlone for the Shamrock Bowl. Importantly, though, for the Minotaurs, that's 2 wins they have over the Rhinos this year. So the momentum is definitely with them.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think, look, they've obviously just come down, so you'd probably expect them to be a bit more polished. I've obviously played them twice last season. Hugely powerful team, great on the run game, really hard-nosed run game. Joe coming back is going to be an asset. I don't know how active he's going to be into the playoffs. I suspect they're probably going to try and leave things roughly where they were for the regular season, unless he's absolutely full go. Maybe sprinkle him in here or there where they can. But yeah, hugely impressive. Great way to bounce back. I think they'll be excited. You'd have to say they'd fancy themselves, obviously, as you said, Dara, with the 2 wins in the regular season over the Rhinos. But also on the flip side, I think the Rhinos have got to be delighted. Maybe a little bit disappointed they couldn't sneak an extra win, but a 5-win season has been hugely impressive for them. They've well and truly separated themselves out from the group behind. I think they've managed to gain a lot of momentum in the turmoil of the Dublin clubs that's been going on in the last few years, that they've managed to capitalize and really be able to get an investment and a buy-in from those, if you want to call them free agents, I guess, of who was around Dublin. And obviously we've been talking, the recruiting effort is continuing as we speak and always goes on. I think that's a great sign for the club. So we discussed as well some things to learn from in this game. I don't think it's probably a little bit not as close as you would have loved going into the playoffs, but ultimately not a 60 burger. And so I think there's plenty you can be positive, at least some tape to watch, some things to maybe polish up, and also some wrinkles to add in, which could generate a very interesting semi-final. And as you said, not a particularly bad trip to have to go out to Westmead. It's a nice pitch out there. It's not too far away. So I think all things point to a pretty competitive and fun semi-finals.
Yeah, and the clubhouse has just been recently redone there, and it looks fantastic, and the change of facilities are great. So, it's not exactly the worst thing in the world. We're not going up to the tip of Derry for an away game, or down to Cork or something like that, So it's so ideally it would have been great to have. I don't think the Rhinos, speaking to David Hosford before, that they've never actually hosted a playoff game ever. They've always had to go away and play playoff games away. So it would have been nice to have a playoff game at home for the first time ever. But the fact that it's 2 5-3 seasons in a row, 2 winning seasons in a row, 2 third places in a row, playoff appearances again, for the 3rd year running. So things are definitely looking up again. It's with the beginning now of the youth team here too. Recruitment obviously is going to continue in the off season. Flag is still on the agenda as well. It is a growing club in a positive sense, and hopefully it's going to be a good omen for the future for the guys that just want to get back up and playing the Premier Division football. We have a couple of games to look ahead to for this weekend. A few games that have huge implications, like I mentioned, when it comes to playoffs, not just in the Premier Division, but in Division 1. Let's start with the Premier Division, and the big game of the weekend is the Dublin Rebels hosting the UL Vikings in De La Salle. If the Rebels win this game, they are finished 4th. They'll head to Belfast to take on the Trojans in the semi-finals. of the Shamrock Bowl, in the Shamrock Bowl, I should say.
Is it Rebels Vikings or Rebels UCD?
Rebels Vikings this weekend.
Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, sorry, mine. Don't worry about those notes. There. I didn't get down. I didn't do.
Didn't get down that far.
Actually,
Okay, cool. That's
didn't
grand.
get down
That's
that far.
grand.
Don't worry about that. But yeah, like I said, so the Rebels play host to the Vikings. You would expect, Fionn, with the season both teams have had, that the Rebels should be able to do business here and should be able to, make it into the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they will. They'll be licking their chops. They don't need any extra motivation, and they've been playing good football this year. To be honest with you, they've been building stronger and stronger. They really took UCD to it. They'd be a bit disappointed not to have managed to win that game, but they really put it up to them. So yeah, I'm going to be honest. I think UL have done pretty well this season, but I'm not seeing too much of a roadblock for the Rebels. I think, as I said, they've got all the incentive. They've can be as much up for this game as any, and I think they'll be excited to almost build that kind of playoff atmosphere one weekend early and make sure they're feeling fired up now and continue the momentum into the playoffs.
Yeah, and a team that will be looking eagerly at this and probably at our socials at the weekend for score updates is going to be the Knights. They need UL to win or to get a draw. It's not just a win that'll do it. If they can get a draw against the Rebels, it means the Knights will take the fourth spot in this one. But Fionn, who have you got in this game?
I'm going to take the Rebels in this one.
Okay, Grant. I am the same. I'm going to take a Rebels winning this, and they're going to take that fourth and final spot to go and face the Trojans, who themselves have a game this weekend. They are playing on Saturday. They take on the South Dublin Panthers in a game that the Panthers have to win to stay up. You would imagine, Fionn, if you're the Trojan side of things, maybe get a bit of rotation going, get some fringe guys some more reps and some more playing time ahead of the playoffs in case, they are needed. But for the Panthers, who are coming off the week they just had, it's such a tall task to go, first of all, to beat the Trojans, but secondly, have to go all the way up to Belfast to beat the Trojans. Yeah,
I think unfortunately now we spoke the last time. I think we're at the point now where it's step one is field the team, right? It's not easy to bounce back. That only happened this week, so they don't really have that much time to kind of rally the troops, circle the wagons, and rebuild a little bit. They've got to go straight up to Belfast. I think Belfast will play a mix. I don't think they'll go full reserves. So unfortunately for the Panthers, I think this is going to be a tough day at the office. I think the Trojans will be keen to finish out an 8-0 season as well. So I'm going to take the Trojans in this one.
Yeah, I think the same. I unfortunately for the Panthers, I was at the game earlier on in the season where they played the Trojans at home. I think it was 40-0 at halftime, and that's when they had probably their biggest squad, because it was their first game of the year. I can't see anything else changing here on this one, and unfortunately, I fear for the Panthers in this one. I hope that they can get the full game out of it, because you don't want to be traveling all the way up to Belfast and having to finish a game early because of injury. So hopefully they can get some lads back from injury and get this game played and get this game finished. The other game in the Premier Division this week is the Craigavon Cowboys entertaining UCD at People's Park in Portadown. Same question I'll ask to you, Fionn, that I asked you about the Trojans. Do we see, or should we see, some rotation from UCD heading into this game, especially concerning them? Especially the fact that, since they've come back from the exam break, they haven't hit the heights they had before it. So do you bring out the first teamers to try and play them into a bit of form, or do you give them a break and let the sort of backups maybe sort of earn a spot for the semi-finals?
I think I'm going to probably recycle my answer here a little bit for the Trojans. I think coming into the playoffs, as you said, it hasn't been the cleanest run of form just recently. So I reckon I'm going to go heavy rotation, but I'm not going to say a full-on resting or anything of any of the stars, and not just have them dressed have them actively participating, but maybe swapping up the units a little bit, mixing a couple of the reserve guys or second string guys in and out. I think that's probably the optimal way to do it. And I think the Cowboys, again, unfortunately, I think they're going to be in for a long day at the office in this one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you on that one. I think the right thing to do would probably get the guys and get them back playing a bit of form, get working through a couple of issues they may be having. And I still fancy them, whether or not it is the first team, whether it's not sprinkled in with some backups or whether it is a full team backups. I think, unfortunately, the Cowboys have struggled. They've had a lot of injuries themselves. And I think that it's going to be a UCD win. And, we'll see what happens to Craig Avenon when it comes to the Shield games. In Division 1, 2 vitally important games when it comes to that fourth and final spot for playoffs. At the moment, the Kildare Crusaders on 6 points from their 7 games are in pole position. They go up to Derry on Saturday to face the Northwest Vipers. If they win, they're in. Nothing else matters what happens to the game on Sunday. But if the Vipers win, this is where it gets interesting. The Vipers will go to 6 points. They will go ahead of the Crusaders on head-to-head. And that means then they will be watching for score updates on Sunday, because the Eagles travel up to Lime Park to take on the Giants. If the Vipers win and the Eagles then lose, the Vipers stay at 4th. But if the Eagles win after the Kildare Crusaders losing, then the Eagles are the ones that take the 4th and final playoff spot. So much on the line here for 3 teams. Now, listen, it could be all said and done by Saturday afternoon if Kildare do their business. But if they can't, there's still a lifeline there for both teams, because even a draw between the Vipers and Crusaders doesn't secure the Crusader spot either, because of how the Eagles' non-rescheduled game against the Mavericks went. They were deducted 1 point, which means they're on 5. So if the Crusaders were to draw to go on to 7 and the Eagles were to win to go also on to 7, the Eagles do have head-to-head, but I think the Eagles still miss out on playoffs because they have a forfeit. So
I'm going to simplify this. The Crusaders are going to win, and that's going to be the end of that.
You could have started that before I went on when meandering.
I love your Rain Man moment, Dara. It makes the show look good. Yeah. You're always on top of your stats. The head-to-heads and everything. I think it's genuinely really impressive. But yeah, I just honestly think the Crusaders are going to go up and they're going to beat the Northwest Vipers. I think the Northwest Vipers have been fairly proud of their season this season, but I don't think even they would argue that they've been playing their best football of the season, or the best football they'd like to be playing. So I'm going to take the Crusaders run game. I think it's going to be strong, and I'm going to have the Crusaders to win that, and that's going to lock up your top 4.
Yeah, for me, when it comes to this game, it's whether the South African running back duo for the Vipers are available. If they are, I give the Vipers a huge chance. No disrespect to the backups, no disrespect to anybody else on the team and stuff like that, but these guys have just shown that they are the difference makers on the teams. They with the Vipers are obviously so much better with them in the team rather than when they're not. Also, I think they've been going with I believe it's their quarterback from the youth team. I believe his name is Kieran Murray. He's getting his first real reps at senior, and maybe it's been too soon for him to come in. It was obviously it wasn't the plan thing. It was forced upon them with the injury to their own quarterback, Dan Danowski. I don't know if he's back for this game. If he's back, there's another opportunity there. But on the other side of the ball, it's the big thing. You have to stop Jordan and you have to stop Wello.
Yeah,
you don't stop both of them. then you're not going to win the game. It's not about stopping one or the other. You have to stop both of them. And that's what the Vipers are going to have to do. That's what the coaches are going to have to come up with a plan with to try and do it. Will they do it? I'd love them to do it because I'd love to see the chaos on Sunday of who can make it and, you know, who's going to make it, who's not going to make it. It would make Sunday an awful lot more interesting. But I find it tough. I think, especially if Wello and Jordan are playing, I can't see the Vipers being able to stop them. So I'm going to go with a Crusaders win. They'll get the 4th spot and they'll be heading to Louth to take on the Mavericks in the Harp Bowl semi-finals. And for the Vipers, look, still a very good season. Couple of wins on the board. I think it's one win or a couple of wins. No, a couple of wins on the board. They have had 2 wins this year. They still have an opportunity then when it comes to the plate. They can maybe finish the season in style, maybe with a plate appearance if they can get through their semi-final. So still, like I said, for teams that we thought were on the brink last year to come back and have the seasons that they have, really happy to see that there's still, you know, it's not all doom and gloom when it comes to teams and the senior kitted side of American football in Ireland.
And it's important, especially if teams want to avoid, I'm not sure what the popular consensus is for the three league solution. But if teams want to avoid that, the best way is to make the 2 leagues competitive from top to bottom, even if the 2 leagues themselves don't merge necessarily well, keeping as many teams competitive and teams like the Vipers showing that they can close the gap and be genuinely in with the chance of making the playoffs when they were one of the teams I think people were wary of. I think that's hugely important and under maybe an under the radar storyline that I think is going to have to be important and then also a good blueprint for teams like the Stags and the Giants who have been really putting a lot of energy, and I think they're about to get a break as well. I think they'll soon come good and start to have a lot more competitive football in their future. So I think that Division 2 is looking strong. I think it's, as I said, not to get too over the top with it, but I think it's great to have these storylines. I think they're really important. It's fun for the fans, even the casual fans that are following Instagram. We'll be putting up scenarios, I know, to say what's going on and keep everybody entertained while they're following the scores coming in for if they can't travel to the games. So for me, I think it's all part of the big picture. It plays really well, and I personally will be excited to follow along to the scores this weekend.
Just before we let go, Fionn, some breaking news. Unfortunately, it looks as though the Panthers and Trojans game is cancelled.
Yeah. Okay. So that's the nail in the coffin then for the Panthers. That'll be a second forfeit. So that's an automatic relegation. Anyway, again, I think at that also probably makes my point earlier about how the other game, how the Stags game was treated versus their game. I think that makes that a moot point as well, unless they want to argue. But either way, they're not going to have the opportunity to get any win or any points that would even theoretically save them. So perhaps that goes out the window. But yeah, look, I'm sure the lads will be bitterly disappointed. I think it's time to go ahead and lick the wounds. I encourage the guys there to get involved in the club side, not because of anything I saw in the background, but just from our experience on the Pirates, Dara. The more invested all the players that are there are, the easier the return to form will be. So yeah, from a guy on the brink or on the edge of a small team to anyone who's willing to listen, I think get involved. Remember, it's a club as much as a hobby, and so with any club, you have to be involved in all aspects. They need volunteers, they need effort, they need energy, and they need ideas. So it goes beyond just showing up on a Sunday or on a Friday and Saturday doing a bit of training. You got to make sure you do your best to keep the club alive if that's what you want to do. So I encourage everyone to stay there if they can. I'm sure you're doing the opposite, Dara. You're saying, come over to the Rhinos. We're not that far away. We're only in the west of Dublin. But that'd be my final sign off. Bitterly.
Yeah, look, it's this is what's going to happen now that the vultures are going to circle, and look, they did as well when the rumors started during the middle of the season. Teams are going to check in. But look, you don't want to see more teams fold. We can't have more teams fold. We just can't.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the
look in the grand scheme of things, it could be a good thing for them. Go down a division, rebuild. Hell, if there is a Division 2 next year, go down to that, rebuild.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah,
I think only the board will be able to tell that. I think they need to be honest with themselves, and I don't mean that in the sense of I know what they should do. I think they should take an assessment of their situation and not overstretch, but also at the same time, I would also encourage them, if the skill and the player numbers are there, not to go down to a Division 2. Try to stay up as high as you can. It's important to play at the highest level you can, and it helps with the draw of players. But at the same time, on the flip side of that, be realistic. If the numbers are really, really low, you know what you have to do. Take the advantage that you have got and the experience that you have got. And I think ultimately trying to get a head coach, I know, is something they've struggled with. I don't want to imply in any way that that's to do with any of the struggles. But I think it's certainly one big step that can be done to help out the players that are there, to take one less responsibility off them and let them to focus on the job at hand for them. And so I think that's maybe somewhere they could start. Perhaps if they do, they obviously they're down in Division 1. A lot of pressure in the Premier Division to have a very experienced coach. I think hopefully now that might open up the coaching pool. I'm not sure what the interest level is. I haven't been involved in any club on that side of things to know what kind of coaches are out there and what kind of experience is out there. But we'll see. Look, it's a disappointing way to end the season. It's a very obviously breaking news here. So we'll see how they react. We'll reach out and see if we get any insight from players there on the board there and see what's going to happen from here out. You're on mute, Dar.
There we go. So that is where we're going to wrap up this edition of the show. Fionn, it's great to have you back. Thank you, sir.
Pleasure as always. Good to be back.
I didn't think there'd be this much Panthers chat now when we were going to do when you decided to come on the show. But hey, happy coincidence. Like I mentioned, this show and every show this season is brought to you by Rain Rocks Web Design. They are the team behind UCP.ie. That's where the latest tables are. Make sure you get there. The latest scores on all of our podcasts too. Follow us on the socials at UnderCenterPod. That's where you're going to get the latest updates this week and the latest score updates and see who is going to make the playoffs and who's not in both divisions. So make sure you are tied to us there on that. Also, if watching this on YouTube, please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel. Help us grow and get up to the numbers. And also, to everybody that suffered today trying to get tickets for the NFL Dublin game,
Miserations.
I'm with you. I am sorry you had to go through that. I was a victim of it as well.
We don't got them either.
You waited so long to get in. You got kicked out as soon as you got it in. You got back in. There was no tickets left at a reasonable price. There's still some single tickets at the moment, I think, but you want to be getting a second mortgage on the house to get those tickets if you want.
I believe there was 500,000 people in the queue at one point.
More.
Which I believe is obviously not entirely Ireland. I imagine that's probably a lot from our UK companions.
UK, Europe, America as well. It would have been a lot. Yeah. So to those that did get tickets, congratulations, you lucky bunch of you-know-whats. I hope you enjoy the game. And hopefully, hey, look, maybe UCP can be at it this year. Maybe we'll keep our fingers and toes crossed that the coverage that we're doing is good enough to get some press passes. But that involves you as well. Make sure you're following us on all the socials and stuff and interacting, because that's what's going to help us as well. But that's where we're going to wrap up this edition of the show. Fionn, again, thank you so much. I've gone rambling. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week.